Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know the Penguin premiere. My name is Grace, but of course I'm not alone. I'm here with my buddy cop mafia crime bust friend. Mike Bloom is here. Mike, how you doing?
Yes, Grace. A pairing as good as several flavors of slushy to be
That's
mixed
right.
together. Is this an experience you've had, Grace? I don't want to
Oh,
necessarily call you out initially, but I know you are diabetic, so I wasn't sure.
yeah, but at one point in my life, I was not diabetic when I was
So you just got it all in before that. You
hmm
knew.
Yes, and I have type 1, so it's like not like because of all the slush puppies I was eating. I loved a slush puppy when I was kid. I did mix the flavors every once in a while. You think you gotta try it. I don't
Yeah, you
know that
gotta at
it's
least try it.
always better combined, Mike.
No, I mean, listen, I know that the world of food, you want to create an ideal dish that hits all parts of the palate, the sweet, the salty, the umami. But when it's just sweet on sweet on sweet and trying to mix together all those different fruits into one, there's a reason why fruit punch doesn't actually taste like all the
Mm.
fruits mixed together. It's not a complete match here.
I do like a fruit punch, but that's an intentional flavor choice, and it's not them just mixing two flavors. I mean, I could get a tour of a fruit punch factory and turn out I'm very wrong, and they just mix all the apple and grape
You
and
better,
cherry
because
and
that fruit
raspberry.
punch factory is getting moved to the other part of town.
Bad news. Yeah, so we're going to chat about the Penguin here. We're going to chat about the premiere, which aired on a Thursday night. They did a special premiere, and then they're going to re-air it on Sunday, and then moving forward, it'll be on Sunday nights going forward. Episode 2 on September 29th. So if you're expecting another episode this Sunday, you're just going to get the same one you watched tonight, which maybe is worth rewatching. I did that today, and I found that it was better on my second viewing. So we'll be doing that. Make sure you're subscribed to the We Know Scripted TV feed. You can find us at weknowscriptedtv.com. You could
Yes.
do that, and you'll be able to figure out how to subscribe to the
This is
podcast.
our iceberg lounge. This is where we're
That's right.
holed up now in an official website.
That's right. So make sure you head there. You can watch us on YouTube. We're on video. Make sure you subscribe there. Set it to be alerted when you get when a new video pops up, and tell a friend that we're covering the Penguin. So yeah, Mike. The Penguin, I feel like has been it's an interesting origin story, I think, in terms of as there are
Well, yeah,
many
especially
in
if you watch
comic books.
Batman Returns. He came from the sewer, Grayson, back
That's right.
then.
That's right. I do kind of like this version of I do kind of wish it was Danny DeVito. Not
I
really.
mean, they sort of are hitting a
Yeah.
bit of a hybrid where, I mean, we could talk about the origin of the character, but I feel like the
Hmm.
Penguin has always kind of been personified as like a bit of a foppish guy that he doesn't
Mm,
necessarily have these gimmicks like the other rogues gallery
yeah.
has that usually he was regarded as just like more of a hoity-toity crime lord who dresses up nice. He's named the Penguin because he has tie and tails. And then Tim Burton just said F that and made him
Yeah.
to like an absolute hybridized mutant
Yeah.
and Danny DeVito's. And now with Colin Farrell's Oz Cobb, they aim for like something a little in between where he's like a little deformed in the form
Yeah.
of the clubfoot, but not
Hmm.
completely.
Yeah. Um, So this is a sequel series to The Batman, which came out in 2022. Matt Reeves's iteration of the Batman. I believe there's another movie of that coming along at some point. It's a movie I really, really enjoyed. I loved that movie a lot. I thought its take on the Batman, there was a little bit of like, I don't know, Nolan kind of did it. Nolan kind of nailed it. And like, what are you going to do? And it's Robert Pattinson. I think people were skeptical. Not me, but other people were skeptical. And it sort of came out. I think it had a bit of a moment. It kind of,
Mm-hmm.
I think it dropped like early 2022. It was a bit of like a January, February release. I'll have to fact check myself on that. And then there was this rumors of like, all right, there'll definitely be another The Batman movie, but also we're just gonna hang out with Oz Cobb, who was in the movie pretty briefly. If I remember, you rewatched this. I did not rewatch the movie before, but I do plan on watching it just because I like it a lot. Um, were you what were your feelings about like we're gonna do a Penguin TV show?
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that the reputation kind of precedes him here, that the way he was built up in the Batman, which wasn't like necessarily a prequel. This was not Batman
No,
Begins, but this is like
no.
2 years into Batman's life as our caped crusader here. But he is still like a relative unknown. The vast majority of the Gotham City Police Department is not very trusting of him. He starts his associations with the Riddler, with Selena Kyle. And when we meet Oz Cobb, as they shorten both Oswald and Cobblepot from his original name to make it a little more grittier, a little more realistic, he is sort of a stooge of a man that is missing from this show for the time being, but is obviously very much in absentia in the form of Carmine Falcone, who is, one of the big mob bosses, or was. We can talk about what happened with him in Gotham City. And then he has like two big scenes, I would say, one of them being the big car chase that he has with Batman, where I don't believe he is in his textbook plum car that will end up being almost his demise
No, yes.
in this episode. But otherwise, yeah, he's kind of given as a bit of a red herring, if you will, towards this bigger mystery of, okay, who is this guy that was giving up a bunch of information to the Riddler, that was sort of in the ears of all these politicians, of all these cops, etc. And so, I was certainly interested in it. I think the big spectacle was made out of Colin Farrell, basically unrecognizable underneath all those prosthetics, all the prosthetics that, in fact, at this moment, has had Colin Farrell say he does not want to personify this character at all. Chances of the Penguin season 2 looking a little unlikely at the moment, just due to Carl Havoc style grace. There's too much shit on him, it seems.
That's right. That made the headlines recently of him being he doesn't really maybe want to do this anymore after. I guess he said he was miserable after having all this prosthetics put on him.
But I was intrigued because, I mean, the focus of Oz's character in the movie, which really bears out in this episode, and I'll be intrigued to see the reaction from superhero fans in particular, is like, the Batman was definitely on a more noir-y side than a lot of other Batman movies, which were much more of your typical comic book action adventure. There was more of a mystery in play, and there just so happened to be some big action sequences in the middle. This pretty much cuts out the noir and cuts out the action sequences. Like, this is a flat-out mafia show. And so, especially as someone who has never seen The Sopranos, I'm very I'm very intrigued by it. It was admittedly a little slow to me in the first half. I think that despite the propulsive action of the very first scene, which is maybe my favorite part of the entire episode and the show so far, I did think we did a little bit of slow rolling after that to introduce all those major characters, set the scene as to like, okay, what's going on with the Falcones? What sort of is the status of the crime families of Gotham? But then by the ending, once Oz's big plan comes together, then you can really see, all right, now I'm in to sort of see the Better Call Saul-esque origin story for how this guy is going to wind up on top by the end of 8 episodes.
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I got to go to a premiere viewing of The Penguin. I say premiere. We started watching the episode at about 8:15 p.m. last night. So by the time we were not finished the episode when it premiered on HBO Max. So it's not like we I didn't see this like 2 months ago or anything. It was last night. Very enjoyable to get to see it on the big screen. I will say my immediate reaction was like, I don't know that I was like, I don't know that I loved it. I feel like I had super high expectations based on the Batman. And I should say, like, a lot of the promotional material says something like from the director of the Batman, Matt Reeves. And that's like a little bit of a misnomer in terms of like the show, because that's like the world that we're in. But he did not direct or write this first episode.
No, he pretty much just gave a check mark on like, yeah, you could use them. Put Cullen under 6 hours of prosthetics again for a lark.
Yeah, this is Craig Zobel, who directed the first episode, and is actually going to direct the first 3. He is an HBO stalwart. He has done The Leftovers. He has done American Westworld, Mayor of Easttown. He helped co-create Homestar Runner. Mike
what?
Bloom. I don't know if you knew. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I did not realize that.
I never knew this, but I did feel like Homestar Runner was entirely in your wheelhouse, Mike Bloom. Is that true?
I lived on that website in the early 2000s. I hope, we're going to have some flashbacks to Falcone played by a different actor. I hope he has like some strong bad persona to him.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah. So Greg Zobel, and then Lauren LaFranc, who has written a series called Impulse and some other work. She's writing this first episode. So I think for me, I do think the Batman, I think one of the things, it's almost a 3-hour movie if I'm remembering correctly.
256.
Yeah, so I do feel like I should have maybe come in and what I felt like I needed to do was recalibrate my brain on the thing that I think I've been hearing a lot about people who make television, is that there's this instinct that you have to hook people immediately. You have to have a thing in a moment and you have to get into the action. And this is not what the show chooses to do. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Like, I mean, like, I think
it does, and then it almost immediately backs off and then does it again.
Yes, agreed. And in a way that I thought in my second viewing, I actually liked it a lot more. Once I saw what they were doing with the entire episode of basically having us be, the opening montage is like, this is what happened in the movie The Batman. So you don't need to watch The Batman, I think, to like feel like you can jump into this world. I think it helps a little bit. I think The Batman is very good, so I would recommend it. But
Yeah.
I think if you are coming into this without watching The Batman, you're totally fine. Don't feel the pressure to go do it. But basically, like, because of this attack that the Riddler had done, there are like these, and everything that happened in the movie. There was a little bit of like an opening for, chaos is the ladder, as
Yeah,
they
there's a
like to
there's a
say in
there's a
HBO.
power vacuum. Yeah, that Carmine Falcone had sort of been the big boss of not only crime but seemingly like all of Gotham City. They say in the movie basically like, "Oh, you think so and so was the mayor? Carmine Falcone has been the
Right.
mayor." That he was someone who sold out a character that we are going to meet in this movie, Salvatore Moroni, who was this sort of other warring crime family. He got busted in a big drug bust, was put behind bars, and Falcone sort of took over everything. And then throughout the movie, it is then revealed that this was a guy who basically had information on all of these politicians, on all of these things that they were doing. And so what the Riddler was doing throughout the movie was killing off all of these politicians, with Falcone sort of like being the rat at the same time, the
Right.
stool pigeon, the bat, if you will. And then Falcone, right when he's about to get taken in, ends up getting killed off. And so that's going to be really interesting, as well as, again, obviously, even within the Falcone family, he leaves open a vacuum for a brief portion of time, his son, and now assumingly his daughter, though we also have Michael Kelly's character sort of serving as a consigliere.
Mm-hmm.
But in much larger sense, as to like, okay, after the Riddler's domestic terrorist attack, it actually is the best time to really be a criminal in Gotham, because nobody trusts any institutions. The cops have been sold down the river. The government's been sold down the river. Everything's been sold down the river because the dams burst and the town was flooded for a brief portion of time. And so this entire series is going to be about basically a game of King of the Hill or Queen of the Hill, and trying to see who is going to be on top, whether it was Falcone's sort of like protege in the form of Oz, or whether it is going to be his flesh and blood in the form of Sofia.
Yeah, and I will say, like, one thing, like, again, I don't think you need to watch the Batman, but I do think, whether it's that movie or so many of the other Batman franchises, what I think is one of my favorite things about the world of Gotham and the way that Bruce Wayne goes about it is that he is this vigilante. He doesn't, in the movie he does like work with police, but he's not feels compelled that he has to, if that's the way he needs to do it. And the ways in which, like, the Batman might also be creating as much of the sort of this world of crime, as much as he's doing, like, he's only as much as he's doing that, it's also causing these chain reactions of people reacting to the Batman and doing things against that. So the idea of this power vacuum, and I do think the show was effective through one episode to, I would say, more with the Falcones, and that's because they are the ruling power versus the Maronis, who Salvatore is in jail, played by the wonderful Clancy Brown. Very excited for him
Yes.
to be here.
Mr. Krabs playing a mob boss, as he should.
So good. He's had a couple of good villain roles last year. He was also in Dexter New Blood. He was really fun in that. So yeah, this feels really fun. I thought by the end of it, and I feel like it does jive with the tone and the pace of the movie to then set us up for an episode where at times it does seem like not everything is in like Cobb's control, and that he's a little bit maybe even out of his depth. He's a little bit rough around the edges.
Yes.
I think that I love this theme. Like, the last thing I think you and I podcasted about weekly, or at least one of the things, was, or a thing we podcast, is The Last of Us.
Yes.
There's a dynamic duo quality to that, and I feel like we're immediately getting it again. With
Wetting our whistle before season 2 comes around next year.
Yes, is between Alberto and Oz, and the idea that both of them have a disability, or a thing that would sort of put them at a disadvantage in terms of like how society functions, but then being part of this like criminal underworld is a really fascinating dynamic. And basically Oswald figuring out, my presumption here is, let the two sides fight, and I'm going to come in at the end, and I'll actually be the one in charge once both sides are weakened, based on the play he makes at the end of the episode to try and convince Sofia that the people responsible, at least, for killing her brother is in fact the Maronis, because he's given the ring to Salvatore. And why would Salvatore not put on the ring and flaunt the ring? It's his ring in the first place, as we learn. But also it's done in like the messiest way possible, in which, like, I think that is what is going to make the show interesting. Is Oswald does not seem like the most proficient professional, mob boss ever. He's rough around the edges, and this plan, like, it worked for, by the end of the episode, we're like, fun. Is it going to work? We'll see where things go, Mike Bloom.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that throughout, and even his personification within the Batman was that, again, this was a guy that was still not necessarily learning the ropes, but was not the mastermind that we usually know the Penguin as. Hell, one of the last times we see him in the movie is him like furtively hopping after Gordon and Batman tied up, being like, hey, aren't you gonna untie me? Like, this is a guy that gets kind of dumped upon in the Batman. But I think this opening episode really serves to beat home the theory of, like, do not underestimate this guy. It is almost grace to pull a character from a show you very recently talked about and has very recently aired on HBO. It's a very big Laris Strong feeling from Oz Cobblepot, of like, nobody really looks at him. He is not the most handsome face out there. This is a guy who has a club foot, who, in the honor of another Batman franchise, I'm sure we'll find out at one point how he got those scars that are lining his face. But, one of the reasons why the entire inciting incident happens in this opening scene is, like, he gets laughed at a consistent basis, that he does not necessarily, due to his appearance, kind of command the power that he expects to. He vocalizes in that opening monologue that he wants to be seen as sort of like Don Corleone in The Godfather, right? Walking down the street with the oranges and blessing all the babies that come his way. And so it is interesting to then put ourselves kind of in that headspace of everybody else, of like, oh yeah, what the hell is this guy doing? He kills this guy out of pure rage. He is making mistakes. Sophia's got him cornered. She totally calls him out. But then by the end, we see, like, oh yeah, her words are right. He can talk his way out of any situation. And he has long-term plans that he can piece together. To your point, it wouldn't be a TV show if there's not going to be complications along the way. But especially in retrospect, I do appreciate the journey that the episode took us with, in terms of also having us underestimate the work of Oz and getting to see flashes towards the end of, okay, I could see how this guy becomes a future member of the Rogues Gallery.
Yeah. I mean, I talked about, like, the idea of, like, whether or not you were excited for the Penguin. I was a little skeptical coming out of the Batman. It was kind of the thing that I was like, yeah, like, okay, yeah, like, I guess, yeah, we could go there. I'm really intrigued in terms of why we think it was something that enticed even just HBO to, like, throw it in as a Sunday night show.
I mean, it makes sense at the time it was announced, right? We're looking at 2022, where, yes, the bloom was starting to fall off the rose when it comes to Disney Plus and MCU, right? But it's always going to be that competition. It's the Falcones and the Maronis. Great when it comes to superhero mediums, that it's like, okay, well, the MCU is doing TV series. Why doesn't the DCEU do television series? And they did do it briefly with Peacemaker, but by and large, they really haven't yet. And so I do feel like once the Batman took off, at the time, I think before James Gunn really started to step into things, it was a moment for them to say, like, okay, we got to start getting into TV. And what's a great way to do it? Let's bring in an Oscar nominee and Colin Farrell to bring his character to the small screen.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I think it's very fun. I'm a big Colin Farrell fan. I will say there was a little bit of rumbling that last night at the premiere, there was a brief video that was played where Colin Farrell thanked us for coming to the event.
Ooh.
And I will say he did not seem extremely pleased or delighted to be filming the little intro. It was basically a stone cold emergency, and I wonder whether he had just been taken out of the makeup. That's my best bet for why he was a little sour and it kind of didn't give us much. There also was an interview with, and afterwards, E-Talk hosted an interview with Renzi Feliz, who plays Victor in the
Mhm.
show, who I'm intrigued because I feel like out of everybody here, Victor is kind of our biggest unknown. I mean, it's Colin Farrell playing like the Penguin, who we know. We have Kristen Milioti,
Milioti.
who we like. We've seen her on a bunch of stuff.
Adore her. She's definitely
Yep.
one of those like Leo screen pointers where every time she shows up on something, I'm like, oh yes, incredible.
Yeah, Clancy Brown, I feel like is recognizable. There's they have recast Carmen Falcone for flashbacks,
Yeah, because
seemingly.
John Turturro's like, no, I'm
I
only gonna
know.
be in one TV show this year.
I don't hate the casting choice for who's gonna play him, and it's very funny that I think we're gonna be going from the Penguin into Dune Prophecy, and he's also in Dune Prophecy, so he's just on television on HBO every Sunday for the rest of the year, I think. But Renzi Feliz is a bit of an unknown, I think, to throw in here, and I think it's a perfect choice for someone who like Oz seems to take a liking to. They meet in this they're trying to steal the tires. He ends up being sort of left behind, but I think it is his stutter, his speech impairment that really Oz catches something in him, sees something in him in terms of somebody who, yes, that he can use. There is the moment. I mean, what do you make of the moment where he's like, I need you to look at the sunset for the last time? Was he going to off him? And does Vic save himself? Or is like, how much is Oz just playing? Like he's a mouse. Vic is a mouse to Penguin's cat. As I'm mixing a lot of metaphors
I
because
was gonna say,
the Penguin is a
Catwoman's a
cat.
different character.
Yeah. But what do you make of that? Like his moment of of not killing Vic, which he says, "I probably should kill you."
Yeah, I mean, to me, again, I don't want to keep making House of the Dragon comparisons, but it seems
Yeah.
very similar to me to how Laris's relationship with Aegon changed following him being maimed in this horrific dragon attack. That it's like,
Right.
okay, here is somebody that I see myself in now. There is nobody else who I've been able to relay my own personal experiences to. And again, maybe we'll find out through flashback, does his deformity come from birth? Does it come from something that was done to him? We get a little bit of a peek into his home life, but not much in this episode. And so I do think it's also a good way to flesh out the character and show that, like, no matter how small it is, there is a heart there. And I do think that Oz talks throughout to Vic about, like, you need ambition. There needs to be, you can't just be small potatoes. You need the whole freaking state of Idaho. And I think once he's able to see Vic express that, albeit, with a gun pointed to him and his life threatened, then he's like, okay, you passed the final test now. Let me drag you into this criminal underworld, kicking and screaming.
Yeah, I sort of jumped from like, what are we doing in the Penguin to the relationship with Vic, because I think that in the show, it's the best example of the way in which, like, if there's any degree to which we are humanizing some, like, who's essentially gonna, as far as we know, will be a big bad supervillain in the history of in the show, murder someone. He did murder like the son of a crime bot. Like it's I guess that's
it's fine. He had to go back to New York to film the final season of Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
So, but I say that knowing that I felt like for a little bit when we were not that long ago into post-show recaps, that we were talking about a lot of these shows, and there was a little bit of this, like, there for a little while there was a sort of a revolt against the anti-hero of like, yes, we had the golden age of television where we did have Tony Soprano and Don Draper and Walter White on our televisions who we loved to watch, and they were interesting and fascinating characters. And then the real world got real, Mike Bloom. And I feel like there was this moment of like the things that resonated were Ted Lasso and Schitt's Creek, and there's sort of like fuzzy heartwarming thing. And I could feel sort of, as I was saying, like, I don't know whether anti-heroes are resonating. I felt like I was completely wrong in that like you could feel that like we were ready, I think, to sort of re-explore and re-examine. And so I think it's interesting that the Penguin is like this Sunday night show. Also, like, it's sort of like tailing Industry here, which I think is another show that basically over the course of its show has basically said, like, if you're a good character, we actually don't know what to do with you on the show, and we're removing you from the equation. And so we're back in this, I think, in this world where we are really interested. The other thing that it reminds me of, there is a movie coming out that I got to see at the Toronto National Film Festival, and it's about Donald Trump. it's The
Oh.
Apprentice, and it's Jeremy Strong playing Roy Cohn and Sebastian Stan playing Donald Trump. And there was this interesting conversation afterwards about like whether or not it was fair, and people were being like, "Why?" And there's this thing about that it's humanizing that person. And I don't need to talk about Donald Trump and The Apprentice right now, but it reminds me as I'm like watching this to be like, why are we watching that? Why are we entranced with? And it is because we are, I think, entranced by the decisions that people make that ultimately end up being what we would say probably are the wrong decisions or the right decisions. And even though we can understand and justify that, like I'm assuming as we see that there's a scene between Oz and his mom that Vic watches. Seems like she is suffering from dementia, likely.
Mhm.
That as you talk about, like we don't know what happened with Oz's disability and whether or not
Where's Daddy Penguin?
yeah, we haven't seen his dad. Whether or not there's something that, like, even if he was born with it, how did it affect how he was treated? How did it affect his relationship to the world? And even if we can understand that, like, oh, what an awful thing to happen, then he chooses to make the opposite decision that, like, we hope people would make. And so as he sees Victor, and then he's like, basically, not that Victor is not doing anything wrong. He's stealing the tires off the car to seemingly do something. He gets roped into this world, and maybe will be further along. And actually, Reggie talked about in the interview that he said this is likely the funniest episode of the series. And
Uh-oh.
so, yeah,
I mean,
um,
there's some very funny lines, from all the, like, the random mishigosh about mixing slushies of, like, oh,
pickles.
driving
Two
around with
pickles is extra pickles is very
yeah,
funny.
driving around with a purple car, it's plum. Like, there's some
Yeah,
fun stuff there, but yeah, I would imagine things are only gonna get darker from here on out, but hopefully not when it comes to the lighting quality. I mean,
yes, agreed.
to your overall point though about where the needle is in terms of like watching bad guys do bad things. I mean, look at the HBO slate and going back
Yeah,
to Industry, going back to House of the Dragon, going back to Succession. Like,
yeah,
I
yeah,
think, despite I agree to your point about societally, people are more so glomming onto more of that warm-hearted content. HBO has kind of just like planted its flag there. That prestige TV is still kind of living in this world of watching these people doing bad things, but wondering, okay, what are the motivations behind them? And yeah, the visit to Oz's mom's house is really interesting because what they sucker us in with initially is that, to your point, this is a woman that may not be all there. And so you think, like, okay, he's just suckering her along. She has no idea what he's capable of. But then, like, once she becomes cogent and he tells her and she figures out, like, what happened with Alberto, she seems to be really, like, his biggest supporter. And it's
yeah.
something that I think
Mhm.
takes a peek into what has caused Oz to feel like he can do all of these types of heinous acts, is because, again, we don't know how much what his childhood might incorporate into the person that he is. But it seems like, regardless, his mother has always been in his corner, being like, no, you are my big, strong boy. You take the world by its horns. And that sort of is like one of the interesting credos of the Penguin, which, again, I think very much juts up against the what we usually see of him, which is, again, the top hat, the monocle, the tie and tails, is this guy who expresses to Vic, like, those guys, the Falcones, they sit in their ivory towers. They have no idea what it means to suffer. We know. And so we need to take what we feel we deserve.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the themes. I mean, the Emmys was just a little while ago, and looking at what won, I do feel like there's this like combination of like, yeah, the examination of people who are doing bad things, but also a lot of like trauma and like if I think about like Hacks with, or sorry, not Hacks,
Mhm.
like the Bear. Sorry, I was thinking about how Hacks beat the Bear, but I was thinking about like the success of the Bears. I see like these like trauma induced people who then. And like it gets worse as they like work in an industry that like does that, and I do feel like I wonder how much like that theme will come out about these two individual people, this pairing
Mhm.
of Oz and Vic navigating this world. And I think that sometimes there's this confusion about like whether or not we're like rooting for these people and whether that's like an ethical thing to do or whether it's just in some form some cathartic release of like the
Mhm.
world is tough and sometimes I can't go out and do the things that Oz is doing and I never want to do them, but it is pretty satisfying when like the people who made him suffer, in the like he's been suffering under these crime bosses, he like is wrapping them around his finger. The only person who can't do that is Alberto Falcone, whose finger was chopped off. That was funny too at the end when he's like, "Oh, I wanted you to do a different thing with his body. I did not want you to." And he's like,
Yeah, and
"Yeah,
that
but
was
I was
funny
trying
as
to chop
well.
off the head, and it like I didn't know what to do with the spinal cord."
Yeah, Vic
So
being like, "It's my second day. I'm pretty sure canonically I haven't slept since you found me. I'm so sorry that I imagine all this gruesome stuff." I mean, let's plant our flag as well here, Grace. I
Mhm.
mean, this is taking place as a sequel series to the Batman. So it's not even a prequel where it's like, okay, we know that things have to stay in this certain place because things are going to happen in the Batman. Do we think that all of our characters, especially I would say like our top three in Oz, Sophia, and Vic, are going to survive all 8 episodes?
Unfortunately, if I was to pick one person I don't think survives, unfortunately, I think it's Sophia.
Mhm.
I
Which
put her in
sucks
the.
because like she's one of my favorite characters.
I agree, and I almost am tempted to say I would actually, if I was putting money, I would say none of those characters die. I think, yeah, I would say none of them die. I feel like they're all probably, and this is actually a thing that I would say. Like, I understand when showrunners are like, they never kill off any of their characters because they love them so much, and it's hard for me even after one episode to see how those three in particular are not involved in the course of a show. If the show intends to be more than one season, I would argue that the Colin Farrell's reaction to the prosthetics means probably not. Although the other hand is like, you could maybe just replace Colin
Well,
Farrell as the Penguin
yeah.
if he doesn't like being in the
Pull a John
prosthetics.
Turturro. That's the other tough thing as well is that it has now come out through, some various depictions of the MCU that I think TV creators and even movie creators are a little hamstrung by like the overall agenda of, okay, you can work with this character, but make sure X, Y, and Z happens or doesn't happen because it needs to get tied into the overall narrative. To your point, we know that there is like some sort of Batman-esque universe that they are trying to build out here under like DCEU 5.0. And so I also wonder, like, could we see an end of the Penguin where Sophia is back in Arkham Asylum alongside, the Riddler and what is assumed to be
The
the Joker?
Joker, yeah. Barry Keoghan. Um, yeah, I definitely,
Have a little bit of a Banshees of Inisherin reunion between the Penguin and
yeah,
the Joker.
yeah. It's speaking of losing fingers, major spoilers for the Banshees of Inisherin if you have not watched it. One of my favorite movies. Yeah, I don't know that I would see any of them dug up, but it is an interesting question in terms of as we map this out, as we continue to watch, whether or not this ends up being likely a one season miniseries. I actually just want to fact check this, whether or not it's been advertised so far as a limited series or a miniseries. It is being advertised as a miniseries. It doesn't mean they wouldn't renew it
Oh, yeah. I
upon
mean,
its success, but at the
look at Big
time
Little
being,
Lies at what HBO is able to do with that after the fact.
yeah. So I would maybe, or I again, I don't think that any of them will die. And I there also is the world where Vic is also the easiest person to think that he dies, that he suffers. He does give me some like Jesse Pinkman energy in the way in which,
Mhm.
like, even if you plan to have him die, I feel like that. I mean, it depends on what they're trying. What story are they trying to tell us about this world?
Exactly.
And there was a lot more story left to tell in terms of the way that Walter White and Jesse Pinkman's lives and the themes of that show
I mean,
intertwined. That it
yeah,
was
we know how
such
well
a.
El Camino worked out.
Yeah, that's right. It's what that was there. There was really, it was would have been a bad idea to lose. I think Jesse Pinkman at the end of season one. I mean, the alternative world, and I don't think this is remotely likely unless Colin Farrell before episode 8 was like, I'm never being in this makeup again, which is the rumor about the world of Succession, which is that Logan Roy was going to die at the end of season 1. And you
Mm.
could see the world in which is that a moral of the story about the this climb to power through these means, and if you do decide to go down this route, this is what ends up happening to you. You die. You don't live. I mean, there's that. He just feels like too big of a person to not also just make sure he's in the Batman movie.
Yeah, that's the thing is that it could really go one of two paths in terms of thematically what it represents. Is it that Vic getting killed is a representation of the end of innocence? That, yes, this was someone who was caught doing a bit of a petty crime, but like, this is a guy that blanched at purely the idea of cutting through someone's trachea. And when he dies, that sets Oz off towards like fully going Black Hat and Monocle, if you will. Or is it that oh, the call's coming from inside the house, and the one to take down Oz is actually the person that's closest to him in the form of Vic. I'm not entirely sure. Can we stick on Sofia for a second?
Yeah,
Talk to me
please.
about what you make of this take on technically an in-canon character in The Hangman.
Yeah, I'm so my like Batman knowledge is really like if I've seen you in a thing in a probably in a TV or movie version of the Batman or Batman, I know you. I don't believe we've seen Sofia Falcone in any. I'm just trying to like look up very quickly on the Wikipedia. I
So
don't think we've seen. She's been in.
she,
She
yeah, she was in Gotham. I don't know if you saw
I didn't
Gotham,
watch
Grace.
Gotham. I apologize. Yeah, that's probably my biggest Batman blind spot is not watching Gotham, which I've heard is really good. So I don't really know why I haven't watched
Yeah,
it.
I watched the first season and really enjoyed it. That's actually there's a version of Oswald Cobblepot there where they deviate even more from the source material, where he is like this young upstart who falls in with Jada Pinkett Smith's new character Fish Mooney. So there's all that stuff going on. But yeah, she gets involved where she actually teams up with young Commissioner Gordon to take down Cobblepot.
Okay. Yeah, I really like this so far. I think the daughter of the crime boss who's found herself in a position of power. I think it's interesting to say that I don't know if there's probably some canon reason or a mention in the movie about why she was in Arkham. Maybe it just adds a level of danger to her
I don't
character.
know.
It's like she was in prison and now she got out. Like, how did that happen? If there's a story reason for her having been released from prison is interesting. I don't think they really get into that into the episode. I'm very intrigued by Sofia and yeah, as you said, the character, the Hangman.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Riddler is able to escape from Arkham at the end of the
Right.
Batman. Like, it's comic books. There's basically a revolving door at that
Mm-hmm.
place just to let people out the most convenient times. But yeah, I mean, I love the complexity that she's already bringing to the character where, again, initially she's, very demure. She's taking Oz out to dinner and talking about like
Uh-huh.
how much she loves
So mindful,
olives.
very demure, very mindful.
But then the more you talk to her and the more you look behind her eyes, you realize like, oh yeah, this is a flat out psychopath. And you see that especially in the monologue that she gives when she sort of presents Oz with this ultimatum. I want you to think. I want you to really think. Am I crazy? Is it all in my head? Tell me that I'm too emotional and that I have an overactive imagination and that I shouldn't take things so personally. But first, tell me he's alive. This is someone who is already on the brink, even past the edge when she finds out that probably the closest person in her life, her brother, is most likely dead. And so that is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I do like the idea that Oz has to basically play the middleman here between everybody who has lost their minds. Like that to me, or like are so evil in terms of Sal and then Sofia, seemingly like the two heads of the organization that he's going to try to like navigate to then eventually usurp power. That to me, I don't think it's unsurprising that like that is intriguing to me, a person who we are podcasting on RHAP, the reality show network, that
Mm-hmm.
it's like,
Yep.
oh, that's pretty fun. How does,
Two
you
warring
know,
alliances.
yeah, that's pretty fun, so and Sophia being on one side of that, and being Kristen Milioti and then Clancy Brown. Yeah, sign me up for that. That sounds that sounds like I'm in for a treat for 7 more episodes.
So do we imagine that just like, I mean, I guess for now the heat is off Oz, right? That
Well, she lets him go is the thing that I think like the problem is that he gave Sal the ring. That to me
right.
is the like I'm like, you couldn't have
And
figured
and
out how to
Oz
deliver that
and
in a
Oz
different
is
way,
just
man.
deny, right? Like he is,
Mhm.
even when he had freaking piano wire grating against his skin, he still
That's
said
brutal.
he got a kid killed
Yeah.
because he refused to give up the information, even though Sophia's like, oh yeah, that actually I think brings you more joy than telling the truth. So I think it's just a when not if that the pieces are going to get connected, and maybe it's going to come down to like this white lie that he told of like, oh yeah, Alberto actually told me the secret about the new drug you're trying to concoct. And so now I'm your
Right.
business partner.
Right. For me, the best way I would describe this is initially I thought it was like it did feel really slow, but it's almost like I feel like what I'm seeing is that we lit the fuse and things are sparkling. They're on fire. They're doing it, and we are heading towards a gigantic train wreck, which very much excites me. Like that. I just again mixed metaphors because you don't light a fuse to light a train wreck. You light it to light a bomb. I think a bomb will go off. Will be
But a bomb
the
can
better.
cause a train wreck.
And then it will cause a train, and then I don't know. Yeah, a building will explode. I don't know. But to me, again, my first instinct was like little slow for this. I think my expectations were so high. Not only was I watching it at a premiere on a giant movie television screen, and then on top of that, I love the Batman. But this does, this feels pretty in line with your rewatch of the Batman. Does it feel tonally in line with the Batman, Mike? Like,
yeah, I mean, I would say the only exception is like the Batman did shake it up occasionally with some of those sequences. Hell, the Penguin is involved in one of them with the big car chase as they try to pursue him. So again, there's not anything in that, and I expect there's not really like there's a car chase and like a brief scuffle between him and one of the goons, and that's basically it. And I don't expect that to really be this series. But in terms of like tone and personification of the character, I think it's very much in line. I mean, here's the big question, Grace. Are we going to get a cameo from, Zoe Kravitz or even an RPATS here?
Do you want to have a cameo draft?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, you can go first. You toss the question. I'll let you go first. As who do you think is the most likely to make a cameo? And this has to be someone who basically is like not listed, right? Like hasn't been listed in the cast. Like it's got to be someone. And I think we could play this either. It has to be someone who is in the Batman, or I think you could also say a la what the Batman did at the end of the movie. We're fully spoiling the end of the Batman movie, which is that like we got a huge indication of the Joker's coming. And I think you could, I think like I would allow us to take a bet on like, will we see, another villain? Will we see another?
Well,
like, I think that you could do
Oz
that.
Get arrested and Harvey Dent's like, I've got this taken care of, fellas.
Exactly. So I would say between the two things, someone who was in the Batman or a Batman world character.
I will go. It's tough because this character leaves town at the end of the Batman, but she is the daughter of Carmine Falcone as well. She is Sofia's half sister. Maybe it's just because she showed her face on HBO a few years ago. I will go with Selena Kyle here. I will go with Catwoman.
I think it's I think those are the two that I would spoil. What I would is that I don't think Robert Pattinson is showing up for the Penguin. It is HBO. Like there is something that like if this was, I don't know what else it would be, but like if it was something else, I don't know how much I would say that. But I think if you're to pick someone who was in the movie, I do think her showing up as is a fine pick. Is it canon? This is where my thing pulls apart. In the Dark Knight trilogy, Scarecrow, doesn't he play a lawyer at some, or like doesn't he play like a?
No, Jonathan Crane's, he's a psychologist. He's a doctor.
He's a doctor. See, I was going. I'm like, if we're in the like lawyer crime world, like where could we go in terms of Batman characters? Should I just pick a random one? Should I just pick that
Calendar Man?
Yeah. Should I just pick that we get in? Because I threw the name on, then I won't spoil anything else. I'll just say a Scarecrow mention.
Okay.
Is what we'll get. I could see somehow that a character who maybe isn't named Scarecrow, but then seems pretty obviously that they're going to be Scarecrow shows up.
Yeah, like he's being psychoanalyzed by Dr. Jonathan Crane or something.
It's he develops a drug, so you could see that
ear toxin. Yeah.
So I could see the world where the shipment. We didn't get resolution on the shipment this episode, right? Am I correct? Am I correct on that? He takes a picture that the shipment is coming.
So it was 2 days when he speaks with Sophia, and I'm assuming maybe it's like 1 day when everything is settled with Vic at the end of the episode.
Okay, so I'm gonna. My thing is that it's the shipment is a drug that is somehow connected to Scarecrow, who's developed a hallucinogenic drug.
All right. Should I give another one now that I'm looking through?
We'll do one more each. I think. Yeah, is that?
All right. So I will go with someone who is not canonized yet, but is related to the crime world, and I believe has like a big role in Birds of Prey. I will go with Black Mask, who is a crime lord. That's the character played by Ewan McGregor in Birds of Prey. again, this is a crime related series, so I'm trying to figure out like who would be within the immediate circle. I could see that happen.
Okay, I like it. Since this is fun. You did someone from the movie and then a villain. I just did a villain. I'm gonna pick someone from the movie. I mentioned up top that the director of this episode, Craig Zobel, also directed episodes of Westworld, and there is a character
Aha.
from Westworld who would make a ton of sense to at some point show up in an episode. And I feel like it feels maybe likely that we get Jeffrey Wright as Detective Gordon, Commissioner Gordon.
Lieutenant. I don't know if he's commissioner
What
yet.
is he? Yeah.
He's Lieutenant Gordon in the movie, but there's a lot of bodies at the end of that movie that he might have worked his way up. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Does it count if he appears in like archival footage? Because we even opened the season right on like, here's what you missed at the end of the Batman.
Yeah, we got. I mean, technically, Paul Dano has been in this show, but I would say that that's not. I would say they'd have to have participated in coming to set and being in new footage. That's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of fun. I think I would be very delighted to see Jeffrey Wright again on HBO Sunday night. So
well, then should we do another draft? Should we do a death draft on top of that?
Okay, let's do it. All right, the death draft. You went first last time. Do you mind?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I think the easiest pick here is I kind of gave the big three, and I think if you round that out to the big four, I think the fourth man is the one who's most likely to die, which is I think Clancy Brown could die by the end of the season. So I'll go with Sal Maroni. Yeah.
Do you think he gets out of prison by the end of the season, or
I think he's not spending the whole season in prison? I don't think. Yeah, I think he's getting out.
Yeah, Orange doesn't look good on him. No. I will go with a character who is introduced, has a name, so I think this counts. I'm gonna go with Michael Kelly's character, Johnny VT, who again is sort of like the fill-in, the underboss of the Falcone family as we see him. He's the one who sits down with Oz to tell him basically like, you're done removing the plant. I imagine either through Sofia, who I imagine is going to have a little bit of a power struggle there, or through Oz himself, or maybe even through Maroni, is going to get killed at some point.
Yeah, the underboss. He's like the biggest Falcone name who could die, right? Because after Alberto died this episode.
Yeah, and there's also, I mean, you have like Milos, who is sort of like this former bodyguard for Carmine, who like is sort of in there as well, who sort of seems to be the go-between of the two guys.
No, I think VD being the like highest step member, like he's the underboss of the family. That makes sense that he could get off. All right, I'm gonna talk through some options. Just because then you can just take I can't take them all. Unfortunately, I think there are a couple of female characters who definitely have the potential to not be alive by the end of the season, which is I'm between Oz's mom, Frances, Eve, the woman he goes to see who he pays for an alibi. And then there's also Bella Real, who's the mayor-elect of Gotham, who kind of showed up. I would say the closer you are to Oz, the more deadly it is. And I will, for the sake of not hoping that Eve, the woman who seems to just be trying to make a living. Yeah. In fact, I will instead hope that it's Frances Cobb, Oz's mom, who just seems to, she's just old and his mom, and that would be a moment of, and maybe she even just dies like of natural causes.
Yeah.
You know, so I will go with Frances Cobb. I will say she did have some good advice. She's like, don't leave town. That will look hyper suspicious. Please just stay in town so you don't.
And also like, don't be a P word. You know, only P words do that. Listen, all back cleanup. I'll take Eve. Eve was definitely on my list because I definitely see something where either whether it's Maroni or whether it is Sofia kind of coming wise to what happens, would kill somebody that is close to him to send a message. Like if they can't get to Oz, the next best thing would be his mother or, you know, his closest confidant from a romantic perspective. So yeah, unfortunately, I think it's happening. And Grace, did you realize you were sort of name dropping a line from the song to close out the episode with Making a Living?
Oh, I love that. The 9 to 5 playing in the car.
Yeah.
That was great. All right, very fun premiere, Mike. I thought it was actually quite good. Again, I think I had to readjust, had to recalibrate a little bit on what I was thinking from a superhero show. But once I rewatched, I thought it was pretty well done, and I have very few nits to pick, and so I'm very excited to see where we're going. I know there's lots of other folks in our orbit, Mike, who are watching, so we might be joined by some guests along the way.
Rogues Gallery of Podcasters.
That's right. That's right. So we'll be recapping every episode. Again, as we mentioned, this first episode dropped on a Thursday. It's going to re-air on Sunday night on HBO on the, let me just make sure I get my math right. That's the 22nd. And then episode 2 will air at 9 p.m. on Sunday, September 29th. I will be watching that and the finale of season 3 of Industry and then recapping both of them. So you can expect those in your podcast feeds, and we're on YouTube. Again, please subscribe. WeKnowScriptedTV.com will get you all the links you need, and you can go to YouTube and subscribe. Mike, what else do you got going on? There's only a few things happening in your world right now.
Just a smidge. You got a whole shipment of podcasts coming your way. It's not really a new drug, but it's a new season of a familiar one. Survivor 47 is officially here. Of course, I'm doing coverage for it over at parade.com, weekly exit press, as well as the B&B with Liana Boris. Very fun. Also covering Big Brother, The Challenge, The Circle over there. From a scripted perspective, of course, every week, Sasha Joseph and I are getting together for TV for Real, which is a podcast where we take reality TV stars and have them talk about some of the scripted TV that shapes them, past, present, and future. This week, in honor of the Survivor premiere, we talked about a legendary first boot in Hannah Rose and really went truly all over the map.
Love it.
All over the timeline. It was a really, really fun time. So be sure to check that out. And Josh Wigler and I are trying to capitalize on, that lost trend now that it's on Netflix. We are doing weekly season by season recaps for first time viewers. They are spoiler free. We give our thoughts on what has happened so far, the historical impact at the time, etc. So we did the first 4 seasons, moving on to seasons 5 and 6 before we move on to something else. So you can check all that out over here on WeKnowScriptedTV.com and everything I'm doing online at a Mike Bloom type.
So fun. In addition to all the recaps I mentioned Industry and this, also the Rings of Power, which has been super fun. We're loving that. And then the Tastemakers each week, where Taryn and I watch everything and tell you what you should and should not watch. Kevin Jacobs joined us from Big Brother Canada to talk about all the movies we watched at TIFF, which I know we had some overlap, but collectively, Kevin and I watched, I believe, 60 movies at the Toronto National Film Festival. We did have some overlap. We watched some movies together, in fact, but we watched a lot of movies. So we condense it down to tell Taryn what to watch and what the listeners should watch. So check that out. We'll be back in a little over a week, because we'll have to wait a little bit for the episode 2 to drop. But until then, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.